The story begins with a demon seducing a peasant who hasn't eaten for days, making the river fill with fish. He even makes a huge fish land in the peasant's hands. However, to enjoy it, the peasant must sell his soul. For 10 years, he won't suffer from hunger, but at the end, his soul will be claimed to burn in hell. Tempted by his desires, he signs the contract. 200 years later, we see the award ceremony for Korea's top executives. Here, we meet our protagonist, Dohi, a businesswoman known as the Princess of the Myri Group, who wins for the 3rd consecutive year. After this, Dohi is forced to go on a blind date. She behaves indifferently and tells the guy that she's married to her work and isn't interested in men. The demon tells her he doesn't care about her life and only wants to eat in peace. Seeing that he's a jerk, Dohi leaves but accidentally bumps into a waiter. The demon, noticing his precious cake falling, catches it and almost kisses Dohi, making her feel butterflies. Although she considers him cold, his presence exudes sensuality. She also thinks he prepared the cake to celebrate her birthday, causing her to blush and freshen up. However, while the demon is about to eat his cake, gangsters ruin it, enraging him. He uses a newspaper to make them disappear. When Dohi returns, she runs away, annoyed by his presence. We then meet Dohi's family, the president of the Myri Group, Yeon, who adopted her after her parents died, Non Suk, the eldest son, Kim, the daughter-in-law always seeking approval, Don Kyon, the only son of the couple, and Non Swan, the president's second daughter. They all see Dohi as an obstacle to inheriting and leading the Myri Group. Later, Chu gives her a cake and asks about her date, but Dohi says it was horrible. She shows a picture and realizes there was a mix-up. They call to apologize, but the demon dismisses them and hangs up. He gives Dohi 2 rings, asking her to give one to someone she truly loves. Yeon has a foundation called Sunwall that supports traditional artists. Here, a girl named ___ gets jealous of Dohi's blind dates. We also learn that the peasant who made the pact was her ancestor. We discover why Dohi hates her birthday. Her parents died on that day. A taxi driver tries to send her to heaven, but she escapes and runs into the demon, asking for help. June-won agrees, but only if they make a deal. As she hesitates to sign, a criminal attacks, and the demon uses his powers, saving her but falling into the river. Yeon saves her but notices his mark has transferred to her wrist. Dohi thinks she had a nightmare, but Yeon is beside her, behaving more kindly. Holding her hand, he realizes he can use his powers, but when he lets go, she slaps him. Inspector Paekan arrives to investigate who tried to kill her. Yeon goes home to speak with P. Gyeon, needing to regain his powers, as remaining human too long will burn him. He tries to carry out his demonic duties but is attacked by fighters. He jumps out a window to escape. Dohi visits an elderly woman in a greenhouse, where she meets her nephew John. Seeing their compatibility, the elder suggests they marry. John Sion offers to drive her, but the secretary doesn't leave them alone. Upon learning Dohi had blind dates, the secretary breaks suddenly, hitting John's nose. Later, Dohi ties his tie playfully. Dohi finds out Suna published an article defaming her company, Myri Apparel, causing significant financial loss. She blackmails Suna to retract the defamation, threatening to reveal photos with her lover. Chu confronts Dohi, saying he can't do anything since meeting her. He asks for her hand to use his power and drives recklessly until they reach a fighter, shooting him with finger guns and claiming his soul. Dohi mistakenly thinks Yeon is proposing a bed game, but he clarifies, wanting to walk outside the car, so she refuses. He points out that taking a walk isn't illegal, making her seem overactive. He throws her into the river, hoping to restore his tattoo, but it only angers her, calling him stupid and crazy. While walking, a motorcyclist throws acid at Dohi, but Yeon shields her. After healing, he confesses he's a demon. Dohi asks him to be her bodyguard, but he refuses. The next day, noticing his finger burning, he agrees, realizing he needs her protection. He makes a contract with a sick girl's family, saving her in exchange for their soul, and celebrates with a cake. Dohi is upset, feeling he exploited the mother's weakness. Feeling guilty, he visits the girl, learning her true wish is for her parents not to suffer. Surprised by Dohi with an umbrella, they get a message from the elderly woman's farewell, rushing to the greenhouse, finding her dead. Dohi desperately asks the demon for a deal, but he can't resurrect the dead. At the funeral, Dohi is disgusted by the family's fake sorrow. Yan explains funeral customs to Dohi, helping her use his power to bid farewell. The inspector informs them that someone tampered with the elderly woman's medication, causing her death. Dohi is shocked, while the heirs focus on the will. The elderly woman surprised everyone by leaving part of her money to Dohi and making her the president of the Myri group if she marries within a year. The family begs her not to accept, but she stands firm. Dohi asks Yan to marry her, but he refuses. She follows him, trying to separate her personal and work life, requesting music to forget the bad moment. The radio plays marriage-related songs, frustrating Yan. That night, Dohi asks for a meeting, embarrassed by the rejection, demanding an explanation. Yan rejects her again but offers to walk her home. At a stoplight, an impatient driver honks, so Yan uses his power to make the airbag hit the driver's face. He then hides a letter in Dohi's purse and pretends to break abruptly, waking her up. Dohi lists Yan as her emergency contact, reading the letter asking her to be strong for the upcoming battles. The letter advises her to marry to avoid the lonely director position and not suffer the same hell. The next day, Yan is invited to a team dinner, bringing Dohi, annoying a girl who likes him. Yan takes Dohi's hand, explaining he likes her but won't marry just because of feelings. Dohi, offended by his analogy, leaves alone. Gangsters surround Yan, informed by a psychopath, attacking him. Dohi blows a whistle, dispersing gas, and fights her way to Yan. They tango dance, humiliating the gangsters. Yan follows 3 rules: never lose sight of her, never leave her, and never fall in love, but he's already in love. That night, Dohi searches for Yan, nervously finding him shirtless. She's about to take his manual when he stops her. Chin interrupts, treating Yan like a boyfriend, so he kicks them out. Dohi has a date with prosecutor Choi W., but Yan, jealous, makes a lobster bite Choi's lips, swelling them. Dohi proposes marriage and asks her secretary to prepare for the wedding. Juan asks her to give up, as he believes she's heading into danger. Using his powers, they find the mobster to help locate the psychopath. However, when Doji almost gets herself killed, she becomes very angry and leaves. When she arrives home, the psychopath knocks her out. She wakes up hanging from a balcony by some sheets, which the psychopath starts cutting, terrifying her. Just as the sheets break, Chan catches her, having driven quickly to save her after receiving an emergency message. The psychopath attacks Yan to make them fall, but Yan uses his powers to teleport to another part of the building. Doji hugs him and cries. John Sion arrives and, seeing her suffering, tells her not to fight alone and proposes marriage. Before she can respond, Yan also proposes, but she leaves them in suspense, saying she will think about it the next day. Jose Jayan brings her a plant. The demon becomes very jealous seeing them laughing together and makes a strong coffee while reading his companion's book, 100 Tips for Your First Love. Doji attends an event solely to see Nook's reaction when she invites him to her wedding. Later, we see the protagonist dressed as a bride, launching her new drink as she walks toward the groom. She chose Yan, although she handed him a contract the night before, agreeing to pretend to be the ideal couple to achieve their goals. Their assistants compete to see who claps the most at the wedding. They kiss for the press, convincing everyone their marriage is genuine, though they are genuinely affectionate. Yan goes to Doji's house but is startled by the mess, thinking it's been robbed. He grabs her wrist and starts cleaning, using his powers to retrieve a blouse mistakenly thrown in the trash. The next day, they begin following Nook, suspecting him to be behind the psychopath. When Nook almost catches them checking a locker, Yan kisses Doji to hide their faces. A homeless woman warns Yan that he is weakening and will soon be beyond help. Yan moves in with all his things, filling Doji's house, leading to their first marital argument, and she kicks him out. Meanwhile, Jean suffers because Yan doesn't love her. She recalls her alcoholic father who beat her until Yan appeared to claim her father's soul, which had been sold for money. She began following Yan, seeing him as her savior. Some men harass her, but she slaps one, and Yan appears to take her home. Chuan sneaks back home, but his wife nearly scares him to death by waiting in the dark. He convinces her to let him recharge his powers. Meanwhile, the psychopath plants a microphone in Yan's office and steals his manual. The news falsely blames Doji for an old woman's murder to claim the inheritance, leading them to seek out Nook to declare war. This lunatic almost kills the protagonist with a shotgun blast. They then threaten the YouTuber who spread the false news to retract it, or they'll frame him for robbing a bank. That evening, they see Jean performing and Jan is filled with nostalgia. The Mafia reaches their foundation, and Jan's powers fail, making him consider fleeing. His boss steps in, offering help. Later, the inspector arrests Dohi for the alleged murder, as Nook has used his influence to frame her. When Jan hears this, he rushes out, but the psychopath stabs him in the chest. P arrives, making the psychopath flee, and Jan is rushed to the hospital. The surgeon says Jan's condition is critical, and it might be his last night. Dohi, with the help of the inspector and Josian, escapes to see Jan. She places her hand on him to help him recover, but his powers only work partially, and he's close to turning to ashes. Dohi is released due to lack of evidence, and that night, they sleep embraced to recharge their energies. Later, Dohi attends a meeting to elect the new president of the Myri Group but resigns, leading the shareholders to elect Noshio. Jan admits his weakness and inability to protect her, driven by Jin's claim that Dohi almost killed him. He kisses her, and they can no longer hide their feelings. Jan tells Dohi to leave because everyone close to her dies. He kisses her and stops the falling rain. They succumb to their love and later go for a bike ride, doing mundane couple activities. Dohi signs the documents to formally renounce the inheritance, but Jan persuades her not to stop searching for the psychopath, as she'll live in fear otherwise. The Mafia cleans the theater, and Jan gives them the task of finding the psychopath based on a police sketch. That night, Dohi drunkenly calls her husband after celebrating her release from the inheritance with her secretary. Jan asks Pakan to help take the secretary home, and Shin flirts with Pakan while the demon carries the protagonist piggyback. The police locate the psychopath through facial recognition, identifying him as Jan Shul. That night, Mim lures the psychopath into a trap, setting him on fire and revealing he killed his mother by changing her medication. The next morning, they learn the psychopath's location but find him burnt to a crisp. Jan finds the spying microphone in his office, realizing the real culprit killed the psychopath to cover their tracks. Jan's powers vanish, signaling his impending death. He seeks out the homeless woman, suspecting she knows more, and she reveals herself as God. Though she gave him his powers, she can't return them. Dohi must die for Jan to recover his powers, or he will combust at the next full moon. Cyan learns Jan's true identity from Jean, who reveals he's a demon and suggests using Dohi to regain his powers. Dohi bakes a cake for Jan but accidentally uses salt instead of sugar. They laugh and watch horror movies, and she throws popcorn in fright. The demon announces a trip to Socho to recover his tattoo under the full moon, but Jean warns Dohi that Jan will die if he doesn't regain his power, urging her to sacrifice herself. On their journey, Jan stops for gas, and Token follows them under his father's orders. Discovering Token cloned his phone and learned about the psychopath orders, his father burned his arm and commanded him to prove his worth by killing Dohi. At a shareholder meeting, they officially elect Nook as the Myri Group president. Meanwhile, Hun speeds toward the protagonist to hit her, causing an explosion. Cyan and Jean arrive, having rushed to prevent tragedy when they learned Dohi planned to sacrifice herself. Jan, seeing his beloved dying, enters the burning store despite the intense flames. The ceiling collapses, but he crawls to take her hand, restoring his tattoo. He manages to carry her out safely. Afterward, Sean uses his powers to dress himself and goes with God to brag that his powers have returned. He also gives a tip and tells the protagonist that the vagrant is her boss. Then, he looks for an elderly couple to make a contract, granting the husband that his wife would recognize him so he could say goodbye before she dies. This farewell makes him cry, and he justifies it by saying he was sweating through his eyes. Later, the protagonist wants to find the real killer, and since her secretary is acting very suspiciously, they start to follow her. Here, they see her exchanging a box with a stranger, and when they approach, they discover that she has dealings with Pakan. The next day, Nox Min visits the protagonist under the pretext of inviting her to an investment and leaves a photograph of her parents. Chan, already suspicious that he is colluding with the psychopath, pretends to go to the bathroom and finds the Yan manual. They also notice they are hiding their son. So, when they leave, he calls Dohi to tell him everything he has found out. Then, using his power, he infiltrates Nazem's house to recover the manual and finds the psychopath's cell phone. Here, we realize that Doken managed to escape the explosion, and his father visits him, telling him he is useless and orders him to surrender to the police to reduce his sentence. Hence, we see Dokun confessing to all the murders. That night, the demon has the same nightmare, discovering that the mysterious girl named Wal Sim is the protagonist in her past life. Somehow, it indicates that he fell deeply in love with her from that moment, pretending to study by the river to see her every day while she practiced her dance. At that moment, Juan gave her a cross to remember him while he went on a journey, promising to marry her upon his return. However, the villagers treated her as a scapegoat for being Catholic. Before they could harm her, he returned from his journey. Upon learning what was happening, he ran to prevent her from being killed, but he arrived just as they took her life, and he saw her say goodbye with a tear. Blinded by revenge, he turned evil and killed everyone who condemned her. Refusing to go to heaven, he committed suicide beside his beloved. For this reason, he became a demon. After that, he talks to God, who tells him that he is only repeating the destiny he created and that tragedy will eventually fall upon them again. That afternoon, they receive a call mentioning that Dokun took his life in his cell, unable to bear his father's evil and suffering from psychological disorders. Then, they go to Jean to see his performance. She mentions that she will leave Korea as she only has sad memories there. Additionally, she tells Pi Pong Hun that she started dancing because of the painting of the Two Swords dance, hoping that the demon would see her dance with the same warmth. Chan feels guilty about his memories, and Dohi, noticing he is crying, asks what is wrong, leading him to confess what he lived. Because of him, the person he loved the most was sacrificed, as his desire back then was to show that love could save people. For this reason, he believes that spending more time with her could make her unhappy. However, the protagonist tells him that she would be unhappy if he wasn't with her. Afterward, they hold hands, and Yan promises that if destiny exists, he will do everything possible to give them a happy ending, making butterflies fly and petals fall on stage. Days later, the protagonist has a nightmare where she searches for her parents and cries because she is left alone. Juan, seeing her suffering, uses his power to take her to where they were waiting to finish decorating their Christmas tree and spend a moment of happiness together. The next morning, they do many things as a couple, like brushing their teeth together, feeding each other, playing in the elevator, and kissing passionately. Then, Chan asks his partner to read his tarot cards. Here, she tells him that the card he chose is the Lovers, symbolizing the culmination of their love. Thus, he surprises his beloved with a bouquet of flowers. The protagonist kisses him on the cheek and says she loves him for the first time. On the other hand, Kin Sarah is going crazy. She decides to open her husband's safe, finding some important documents and the demon's manual. However, he discovers her and threatens her. Later, Nos Min gathers the family for dinner under the pretext of keeping the peace, but his true intention is to ask them to give him their shares to control the Mirai group as he wishes. Fortunately, none agreed, leaving him to eat alone. However, he took revenge by ordering an audit of the company Oyen runs, accusing him of fraudulent use of funds to remove him from the direction of Mirai. Upon hearing this, the protagonist screams that she now understands everything. That is why he used the nickname Abrax, the bird that fights to break free from the eggshell, killing its mother not to remain in its shadow. Nosen Min cynically begins to provoke her, mentioning her parents' death was not an accident, but the person she trusted completely killed them. At that moment, Yuan appears and drops a concrete stone. Doji begs him to stop, saying that if he takes a life, he will burn here. Doji manages to free himself and hugs Yuan, pleading for him to stop. Yuan reacts and removes the stone, but when we thought everything would be fine, Nox Sun Min shoots. The protagonist covers her beloved, and Yuan throws him against the wall, desperately asking God for help because he cannot bear to see him die twice. In that moment, Doji reacts, and the demon tells him he is saved. However, out of nowhere, Doji begins to consume by fire, indicating a permanent farewell, leaving only his wedding ring behind. Time stops due to the spontaneous combustion because Yuan broke the rules by resurrecting his beloved while Doji remained dead. Myrina no longer smiles. Poor thing. Despite Cyan and Shin's attempts to motivate her, she continued to blame herself. Days later, she wears the same outfit she wore when she met her beloved and goes to the place where the tattoo transferred. Through tears, she asks to make a deal to get him back. Here, we see that God reset the clocks and the water stops in front of her. Yuan appears behind her, and Doji thinks she is dreaming, but Yuan tells her he missed her. After a few tears, these lovers go to bed to recharge. Later, while decorating their Christmas tree, Doji asks what deal he made with his father. Yuan tells her that his mother was about to give birth, but the ambulance they were in crashed. His father took her to the hospital, but they refused to help due to lack of insurance. Seeing they were close to death, his father made a deal with the demon to save her in exchange for his life. Later, Yuan thanks God for letting him return, but God mentions that it wasn't out of pity. The protagonist made a deal and God agreed to it to settle a bet. Remember that Yuan won the bet that he would regain his powers without Doji dying. After this, Yuan visits the mafia at their restaurant, and they are excited to see him. Meanwhile, Nok's son decides to use his last card, begging the protagonist for forgiveness and considering his children as successors to the throne. However, the protagonist throws him out of her office and then visits the scoundrel to tell him that all he achieved was his own destruction and he will never leave prison. Nok's son Min rages, and the police lock him in his cell where he is tormented by his mother's ghost. His wife finds a photo of their son and cries remembering him. She seeks out Doji to apologize and mentions that she will start a foundation for abused children. Elsewhere, Yuan gives Jean an umbrella before her journey and tells her she will always be welcome to return. As she is about to leave, Jean says goodbye to the house where she grew up but sees a man mistreating his daughter. She reports him to the police and is so moved that she gives the girl some shoes and decides to cancel her trip to stay with her, just as Yuan once saved her. Shin finally decides to introduce Paken as his boyfriend, though his friends mention they already knew since they saw photos of them together. 4 months later, we see that the protagonist actually ceded the presidency of the group to Mirayan. And thus, this series ends. Despite all the adversities, these lovers fought to be together, proving that their love could overcome all barriers of time, life, and death. The end.